father, Professor Sir John Golding, was Jamaica's first orthopedic surgeon. He had come to Jamaica from the UK in 1953, and he was there for a one-year contract en route to the University of Chicago. And then the polio epidemic hit Jamaica of the 1950s, and he had been in the war in Egypt and had experienced the treatment of polio.
This man is just a downright dirty liar, right? Every time he tells the story about his father and lies, I will be coming here with the truth. This time around, however, we'll be doing something different. We will not only be telling the Jamaican people what the truth is, but we'll be asking our Jamaican diaspora who listen to this program to send this to anybody that you knew that was at that meeting. Anybody that you knew that was at that meeting in Connecticut where this Englishman was, I want you to send them this video, because lies must not prevail. This scum has been doing nothing but stealing people's accomplishment and claiming them for his father, right? In order to make himself look good. And we are going to go through it every time he does it. Every time we're going to bring the evidence. So please send this video to all the persons that you know who are at that meeting and ask them to share it with the persons who were there with them. And this man said that his father, did he say his father took part in the war in Egypt? If that was what he said, that's a damn lie. In 1944, his father was studying at Cambridge to become a doctor and qualified. And in 1946, he was trained by the Royal Army Medical Corps to take up a secret position on a secret mission to 3 of the British medical hospitals, one in Tobruk, Libya, Cairo, Egypt, and the other one in Haifa in Palestine. I believe it's now being called Israel. He was on a secret mission, right? He was trained and sent there as a civilian. That was the instruction that came down from his military bosses, that he's to travel to Tobruk, but he's to go as a civilian. What was that secret medical mission he went on? We don't know. But Mark Golding is telling us it had to do with polio. And I don't know if he should be saying that. Perhaps that is the one thing he should lie about, if he's going to be telling lies. Anyway, folks, let me welcome you all to Jamaica 411, where lies die and truth prevails. I want to say a special welcome to my subscribers. Welcome back. Always lovely to have you and reading your comments. Yes, please keep the comments going. Please also, everyone, give the video a thumbs up from now on. Please give the video a thumbs up. And if you have not yet subscribed to the channel, please go ahead and do so. As well as everyone, I need you to share the video, particularly to those persons who were at that meeting in Connecticut, and anybody else you know heard what Mark Golding said about his father, because that's what we'll be dealing with. We're going to be correcting the things that he said. All right? So I thank you all in advance. And now that you're back with me, let's get down to business. So here is Mark Golding at this function, I suppose, in Connecticut, the United States, making a statement telling everyone about himself. It was at the very same meeting where he lambasted our elites in Jamaica, talking about the government of Jamaica is corrupt, and he has not said what corruption they were involved in recently. We would love to hear that. Because for you to say a government is corrupt, it must be an ongoing matter. So if there are things that they're doing now that is corrupt, we have not heard it from the media. We have not heard it from our Golding. We're not quite sure why he went abroad to tell the people that. Well, I guess he's been telling us all the time, but we have not been hearing what it is that they're doing recently since the arrest and charge of those individuals, Ruel Reed and others. What else has been going on? Because you can't simply just talk about the government is corrupt without evidence. If you're going to accuse the government of corruption, you should have evidence. What it is that is happening. And if you know of corruption going on in government, why are you keeping it a secret? Don't get that at all. Well, I dealt with it in my previous video. You can go ahead and watch, but I won't repeat what it is I said in that video. But it was the same function. Same function. He called the government corrupt and said that the elite is supporting the government, which is implying that they are supporting the corruption. Right? Yes. So here he is now telling the people about who Mark Golding is. And for some reason, he believes that to begin the story of Mark Golding, he must speak about his father, largely because his father has works and he has none. So this is how he hoped to find himself in Jamaica House, right? Peddling all kinds of stories about his father, for the most part, is a damn lie. And the part that is lie, for certain, is his claim that the government of Jamaica called upon his father to lead the polio effort. Let's listen to him again.
And then the polio epidemic hit Jamaica of the 1950s, and he had been in the war in Egypt and had experienced the treatment of polio, and so there weren't many people who knew anything about polio in Jamaica. So the government of the day asked him to take charge of the medical response to this epidemic in Jamaica. So the government of the day asked him to take charge of the medical response to this epidemic.
So you heard him. And we are going to mash down that damn lie that he has told, because the mere fact that he has prettied up his commentary talking about his father having experience with polio in Egypt meant that he heard my first video that I did on his father, exposing him to be a damn liar. Right? And he has to be lying, because if he's saying something that is not true and the evidence is put before him that what he's saying is not true and he keeps repeating it, then he's damn lying. Why is he insisting on lying about his father's role during the polio epidemic? It is not for his father's sake. He's a selfish scum. It is all about himself and trying to steal other people's accomplishment and place it on his father in order to boost his political career. That is what this is all about. So these are the facts. This article was taken from the Gleaner archives, and it is dated September 1, 1954. Right? Dr. Sidney Ferreira was put in charge of the polio effort. No wonder he took over the polio rehab preparations. It was Sidney Ferreira who established the Mona Rehab Center. At the time, it was called the Polio Rehab Center, and he had established it on recommendation of Dr. Mackenzie, an epidemiologist whose advice to the government of Jamaica was to set up a polio center in order to rehabilitate those persons who survived polio but who were paralyzed by the disease. We are now going to read the article that was published in the Gleaner on September 1, 1954. Now, the first case of polio was reported, if my memory serves me right, June 9, 1954. And there were several cases thereafter, and the Jamaican government sent to the British and asked them for help. They need somebody to help us here to deal with this matter. And at the time when the government of Jamaica had sent to the British to ask them for help, Mark Golding's father was in Jamaica. Remember, he had arrived in the island on the steamship Gothic, the Queen's ship Gothic, in November of 1953 to take up his position as senior lecturer at the University College Hospital of the West Indies, which was established the January of 1953. When he came to Jamaica, he had no qualification whatsoever as a lecturer. He had no teaching qualification whatsoever, as far as we know. Because when that secret medical mission that he was on ended and he returned to the United Kingdom, he went back to Britain, to the hospital where he did his internship, I suppose they would have called it in those days, or the equivalent, in 1949 to take up a 4-year position as registrar to understudy the world-famous anatomist Sir Gordon Taylor was his name, right? When the university appointed him senior lecturer here in Jamaica, they were going against their own established policies of hiring only professors and senior lecturers from other universities. They took somebody with some experience in orthopedics, but not a great deal, and made him a senior lecturer. We are of the view that they were doing the bidding of the British government or the governor here in Jamaica and took him on and gave him that position, and the British must have done so for a reason. No sooner than he arrived in Jamaica, there were symptoms of polio being seen, but not an outbreak. The symptoms had started somewhere in March or April of 1954, stiff neck and a lot of the other symptoms. But the first case was reported June 9, 1954. The second case was in July, right? I'm giving you the outline. Then the Jamaican government asked the British for help when more cases started to turn up all over the island, and so they know they will have a problem soon. An epidemic was soon declared, and Ferreira was appointed by Rose Leon to be the man in charge. If you'd like to learn more about Dr. John Golding, I did a comprehensive report on his activities back in the 1940s and 50s and exposed the fact that he was a British spy who evidently found his way in Jamaica and became senior lecturer in orthopedics at the University of the West Indies. And no sooner than he arrived, the virus broke out. So you can go ahead and watch that. It's very long, but it is quite interesting, even if I must say so myself. Because in this report, I read from the Gleaner archive and found all of what it was that Dr. Golding was doing at the time and the role that he played, which was very minimal, right? Until right at the end when they handed over the polio rehab center to him to manage. That's when he really came into it, right? At the back end of the outbreak, and not at the beginning, as Lyot Golding will have us believe. Yes, as the orthopedic surgeon, he would assist the doctors and the nurses by, giving them pointers as to how to make the patients as comfortable as possible, because there was no cure for polio. And the manufacture of splints and calipers, that's it. He was also the one who manufactured the splint and calipers to support the limbs of the polio patients. And that was his role in the beginning.
So the government of the day asked him to take charge of the medical response to this epidemic. It was a very serious epidemic.
So having given you a little brief, background to Lai's father, Dr. John Golding, we are now going to look at this claim that Lai is making, that his father was called upon by the Ministry of Health in Jamaica to manage the polio outbreak in 1954. Let's remind ourselves of what Lai said.
So the government of the day asked him to take charge of the medical response to this epidemic. It was a very serious epidemic.
So just to remind ourselves what Laiad Golding said, so the government of the day asked him, that's his daddy, to take charge of the medical response to this epidemic. And he went on to say it was a very serious epidemic. All right, so let's now go to the facts. And this is what was reported in the Gleaner on September 1, 1954. Now, I want this to remember to go to all of those persons who were present in Hartford, Connecticut at this meeting where Laiad Golding was. And I want you to send it also to Sandra's cousin, Veronica. Yes, right? I'm sure the persons who were there, if they didn't know each other, you would also exchange numbers and WhatsApping each other. Please get this to the individuals who are there. And for anybody who may be listening, you risers, and you have connections under the tent with Laiad Golding, please ensure that he gets this for me, please. So that I hope he doesn't have to suffer this embarrassment in future and have his father's name being, dragged through the mud. Allow the man to sleep in peace, sir, and I will allow him to sleep in peace too. Yes. So according to the Gleaner archive, on the 1st of September, 1954, the article headline read, Ferreira to direct anti-polio drive. That's what they referred to the fight against polio at that time. They called it anti-polio. So the article began by saying, Dr. Sidney E. Ferreira, Assistant Director of Medical Services Health, has been appointed to direct, supervision, control, and care in connection with the poliomyelitis outbreak. Let me read that for you again, and please listen carefully to the language that is used. So Dr. Sidney Ferreira, who was at the time of his appointment the Assistant Director of Medical Services Health, has been appointed to direct supervision, meaning to say him around things, direct supervision, control, just in case people had any doubt as to what Rose Leon meant. So he was appointed to direct supervision, control, and care, to make it absolutely clear, right? So he was appointed to direct supervision, control, and care in connection with the poliomyelitis outbreak, right? It went on to say, a policy directive putting Dr. Ferreira in charge of the anti-polio campaign was issued yesterday by the Honorable Rose Leon, Minister of Health. Let me make it bigger so you can see it, so you don't think me and make it up. And me know say Laiad wear glasses like myself, so he'll need to see it as well. Him dumb and slow, you know, but somehow or the other, him going to get it. Just as he got the message that we were giving him, that O.T. Fairclough was not the founder of the People's National Party. It was Norman Washington Manley. It took him about 4 years before we could have drummed that little simple thing into his thick skull. And I want Laiad Golding to pay attention to what I'm about to read. A policy directive putting Dr. Ferreira, not Dr. John Goling, Dr. Ferreira, and he did not have a name change, people. Yes, it's Ferreira, name Sidney Ferreira, right? Did I say anything about Dr. John Goling? Was it a policy directive putting Dr. John Goling in charge of the anti-polio campaign? It was that? No. No. That's not what it says. It says a policy directive putting Dr. Ferreira in charge of the anti-polio campaign was issued yesterday, which was August 31, 1954, by the Honorable Rose Leon, Minister of Health. Now, they are going to now say what Dr. Ferreira's responsibilities are. Dr. Ferreira will be responsible for coordinating all medical activities. So when Lyad Goling told you that his father was put in charge of the medical response, you now see that that was a damn lie. Because it says here that Dr. Ferreira will be responsible for coordinating all medical activities in connection with the outbreak. Did you see or hear me read that it was John Goling? No, not at all. The doctor that was put in charge was Dr. Sidney Ferreira. You hear that, Lyad Golding? You get it now? Well, you're going to take a little while, because you're kind of slow. Yes. So, let me continue reading. Dr. Ferreira will be responsible for coordinating all medical activities in connection with the outbreak. He will be in control of isolation of cases in the outpatients departments and in hospital wards, and the examination and treatment of patients affected with polio. What does that mean? Sit down, Lyad Golding. I don't want you to fall down. What does it mean? It means to say everything to do with the polio outbreak and the patients affected is in the charge of Sidney Ferreira, Dr. Sidney Ferreira. He was in charge of the isolation areas in all of the hospitals, as well as Plum Point, out on the Palisados. He was in charge of the outpatients department. Those are the ones, I suppose, who would have been discharged or about to be discharged. And when it comes to those victims of polio who were in the hospital wards, he was in charge of that too. And more importantly, Lyad Golding. The examination and treatment, it was he who determined how the patients who are victims of polio are to be examined. He examines them, or he determined how they are to be examined, and he determined how they are to be treated, what treatment they should be given. This was a comprehensive directive that would have gone to all of our public hospitals, all of our private medical doctors who would have been seeing persons privately and diagnosed polio. They would know that their instructions about how to treat the patient, right? One of the instructions would have been that they should be sent to which isolation unit at which hospital, and that would come from Dr. Sidney Ferreira. You see that? You see that, my friends? Can it be any clearer than that? Are you also of the view, as I am, that this is clearly stating that the man who was put in charge of the medical response in no uncertain term by the Minister of Health herself, Rose Leon, was Dr. Sidney Ferreira, not Dr. John Goling, according to Lyad Goling. Hmm? Can it be any clearer than that? You think Lion Golden will get it now? What do you think? I'm too dumb. Well, a man who is slow can't exactly be said to be dumb. So let's just say and be kind that he's slow. Yes. Let's read on and see if there's any other interesting tidbit in the article. So the article went on to say the Minister of Health said yesterday that it was necessary in the interest of the health of the people of the country that there should be centralized direction and control as well as responsibility for dealing with the outbreak. Him in charge of the outbreak and all the patients that were affected was under his care, control, and direction. That's what the article said was a policy directive of the Ministry of Health at the time, which was headed by Rose Leon. The Gleaner went on to say yesterday, Dr. Melville Mackenzie, remember that man that I said that the ministry had asked Britain to send somebody to help us to control the disease. That's what it is about. And he is an epidemiologist. So let me read it. Yesterday, Dr. Melville Mackenzie, specialist in polio epidemiology, was accompanied by the Director of Medical Services, Dr. Lawrence Fitzmaurice, calls on the Minister of Education and Social Welfare, the Honorable Edwin Allen, and the Minister of Labor, the Honorable Jebose McPherson. So that's that. So have we cleared that up for you now, my people? You think that Lyot Golding will finally get it into his head? That his daddy was not in charge of anything. That the Minister of Health put him in charge of not a damn thing. Not at that time in any event. But let us hear what else Lyot Golding had to say and let us check the facts.
It was a very serious epidemic and he established what was then called the Polio Center.
Wait, sir? Let's hear that again.
It was a very serious epidemic and he established what was then called the Polio Center. And he established what was then called the Polio Center.
So Lyot Golding said it was a very serious epidemic and he established what was then called the Polio Center. Was that what you heard too? Yes. So once again, let us turn to the Gleaner for the facts. So the first article we're going to read is one that said this day in our past. It said the following events took place on October 27 in the years identified. So we're going to where it's encircled in red, 1954. All the poliomyelitis patients from the Plum Point Isolation Center and 20 from the Kingston Public Hospital are transferred by ambulance to the Polio Rehabilitation Center on the University College ground in Mona. That's the Gleaner Archives. And that occurred, remember, October 27, 1954. Good. We now need to turn our attention to the headline Specialist Reports, Polio Spread from Monimusk Area. Facts show epidemic virus. Okay. So for those persons who have subscribed to the Gleaner Archive, you'll find this information on Monday, September 30, 1954 on page 1. And the bit of the article that I'm going to bring to you, which shows that it was Dr. Melville Mackenzie who suggested and recommended in his report that we set up a polio center for the rehabilitation of polio victims, those that survived. So let us now turn to page 11 of the Gleaner that was dated September 30, 1954. So Dr. Mackenzie made 8 recommendations to the Minister of Health, Rose Leon, and this is the 8th and final recommendation that he made in his report on the polio outbreak and how we may control it and eradicate it, of course. It says, the present outbreak of poliomyelitis will leave in its train a large number of individual problems in relation to orthopedics and rehabilitation in order to educate patients, particularly in the case of adults who may in some cases have to completely change their method of gaining a livelihood. This may involve setting up an orthopedic department with gymnasium and training facilities. As a preliminary step, a careful study should now be made covering the provision of skilled medical and nursing help, accommodation, and material for rehabilitation in the light of the number of patients with residual paralysis and the type of that paralysis. So this is clearly stating that he's suggesting that what needs to be done is that the patients, those that survive the polio, especially the adults, they are going to have to be retrained because, they're not going to be able to use their limbs anymore. So in order for them to have a livelihood, especially the adults, they will have to be retrained. So this now is how the orthopedics come into it, because polio affects the limbs, and I do believe the muscles, and the brain and the heart. If it affected the brain, the heart, or the lungs, there's no return from that. But for those who were only affected by the limbs, the limbs became deformed, and so they're unable to use them. You may have seen polio victims. And so he's saying, you know what? This polio thing is not over when the patient survive. You're going to have to do something. You have to set up something to help those persons who were engaged in some kind of livelihood and can't do it no more, right? So you have to train them in something else. He then went on to say, right, that part of the rehabilitation is that they should set up a gymnasium and training facilities where they can try and train them how to walk again. So this was Dr. Mackenzie recommended to Rose Leon that they need now to set up a rehabilitation center. Now, Lyad Golding, I want you to pay close attention to this article. Ward at UCWI for polio rehab work. Work of repairing and improving an old hospital hut at the University College is being carried out for use as a rehabilitation ward for poliomyelitis victims. It is expected that the work will be completed by the end of the month, by which time 2 aluminum units ordered by Dr. S.E. Ferreira, that's Sydney Ferreira, chief epidemiologist for the polio outbreak, will arrive. So it was Dr. Sydney Ferreira, the man in charge, who ordered the 2 aluminum units. The aluminum units will be used to accommodate patients and thus ease the congestion at the Kingston Public Hospital caused by the admission of polio patients. Another hut at the UCWI is to be used in connection with the manufacture of orthopedic equipment for the rehabilitation of those who have been paralyzed or otherwise affected by polio. The article continued. The Ministry of Health has asked the United Kingdom government to send someone for a period of 6 weeks to train local personnel in the manufacture of splints and other equipment to be used for polio rehabilitation. You heard that? Why? Why were they asking the British government to send somebody who can manufacture the splint? That's a splint they're going to put on the legs and perhaps the arms of the patients, right? I guess to stabilize them, whatever movement they're able to make. And why? Listen to what it said. Dr. John Simon Golding, senior lecturer in orthopedics at the University College of the West Indies, is not available for this work, having gone to England on other matters. So you saw for yourself, when the MONA or the polio rehabilitation was being established, John Golding was not in Jamaica. I just read for you what the article said, that they were just about to prepare some huts at the university, one for accommodation and one for a workshop. The workshop is what Dr. Golding had gone to Rose Leon to tell her that he knows how to manufacture the splint and caliper that are used to assist these persons who are crippled from poliomyelitis, right? He had met with the minister, and the minister decided to set up the workshop. He offered to work for free, right? And that all he needed was some equipment to manufacture the splint and the caliper, as well as 2 persons that he would train, right? So that was what he was supposed to have done. So what he did was to negotiate himself a role in the back end of the polio fight, which is to manufacture the equipment needed by the polio patients. You follow? Yes. And he would have been put in charge of this workshop. That was what he negotiated. So going back to the article, Ward at UCWI for polio rehab work, it was published in the Gleaner on September 14. And you can see it says the work of repair and improving an old hospital hut at the University College is being carried out for use as a rehabilitation ward for poliomyelitis victims. And it went on to say it is expected that the work will be completed by the end of the month, right? Remember now, this is September 14, so they anticipated it would take 2 weeks to complete the repair and improvement of this hut. And it is this hut that would have become the Polio Rehabilitation Center, which was then later renamed, some years later, Mona Rehabilitation Center, and again renamed John Golding Rehabilitation Center. You follow? Yes. Now, when it was established, when the decision was made that it should be repaired and the work started, as reported by the Gleaner, it would have taken 2 weeks. And according to this same article, the Ministry of Health has asked the United Kingdom government to send someone for a period of 6 weeks to train local personnel in the manufacture of splints and other equipment to be used for polio rehabilitation work. Dr. John Simon Golding, senior lecturer in orthopedics at the University College of the West Indies, is not available for this work, having gone to England on other matters. And in clearly 6 weeks notice, they asked the UK government to send somebody to train the staff for 6 weeks. Remember, this article came out on the 14th of September, 1954. They said that by the end of the month, which would have been a 14-day period, right, or 16 days, they anticipate that the huts would be ready to receive patients. They now need to set up another hut for the workshop. And at the time, they said the Ministry of Health asked the UK government to send somebody for a period of 6 weeks, which means that Dr. Golding was not expected to return to the island, right, within that period when the rehab would have been open. In other words, it was anticipated that he would return to the island sometime after the rehab center would have been open and receiving patients. You follow? Right? In other words, if they're asking for someone to come and train the people, no, for 6 weeks, they did not anticipate that John Golding would be back within that period either. Are you following me? Yes, why not just wait? Because they need to have everything in place by the time the patients move into the rehab center. Beg you call Lyad Golding for me, please, and show him this fact. Show him the evidence. Send him the video. Right? His daddy had nothing whatsoever to do with either the conceptualizing or the establishing of the Mona Rehab Center. At the time, it was called Polio Rehab Center. That was the first name. He had nothing to do with it. He was not in the country. It was not his idea. It was suggested in a report by Dr. Melvin Mackenzie. In his report, he's an epidemiologist, and that was his recommendation to the Minister of Health. And the Minister of Health got to work, because Dr. Melville's report came out, I do believe it was the 14th or the 13th of September, 13th of September. And by the next day, they were looking about setting up this center, having identified the 2 huts that they needed. Right? Now, that meeting between Rose Leon and Dr. Golding took place about the workshop. That was his idea, because he said he could, he was an expert in manufacturing the splint. That was about September 6th. And then he left the island sometime after. So, Lyad Golding, your daddy had nothing to do with the establishment of the Mona Rehab. What happened was orders came from somewhere. It doesn't appear as though it originated with the Minister of Health, that all polio patients from the Plum Point, KPH, and wherever they were in the island who were recovering were to be moved into the Mona Rehab Center. That order came from somewhere. My impression that it did not come and originate with the Minister of Health. This is why we suspect that strings were pulled in order to get John Golding to be the head of the center. That was never part of the plan. It was always a workshop. And then he got the center, and he evidently did a good job. But I say that advisedly, because being suspicious that it was the British that introduced this new strain of poliovirus into the island, putting John Golding in charge, a man who came without any qualification and happened to get a job as senior lecturer against the university college's established policy. We don't know if this was not an attempt by the British to make sure that they are able to get all the polio victims in one place, put their man Friday in charge, so they can now study the effects of this virus that was introduced in our environment. Remember, the virus was unusual. This man Friday, the British spy who was sent to North Africa on a medical mission, Mark is telling us, had to do with the polio virus. He was the one that was put in charge of the rehab center. They are now in a position to study, to see the effects of this unusual disease that came into Jamaica by whatever means, and report back to England. So, yes, the patients were contented and happy under his management of the center, but we are a little suspicious here. We would love to get in touch with somebody who was a polio victim and find out what kind of treatment they were getting at that facility, to see if it was simply normal medical treatment or other things were taking place as well. Anyway, let me leave it here. I thank you all for joining me and getting this message out to those folks in Connecticut. I appreciate it very much. I also thank you for giving the video a thumbs up, for subscribing, and leaving your comments in the comments section. Until next time, take very good care of yourselves and walk good.